I kissed the man who was going to be my brother in a bar. My mom and his dad were dating. Brother, respect yourself. I will be your sister from now on. I went to his house as a guest. His dad and mom were flirting in the living room. He pretended not to know me in front of others, but took me to the bathroom to make love behind others. It was obvious that he just wanted to cheat and didn't want to tell his parents. Later, I got together with his brother, and he knelt down to beg his dad to help him. He was determined to marry me. When my mom was looking for me in the villa, I was trapped in the bathroom by her boyfriend's son. As soon as he came in, Jo Suroi locked the door, grabbed my hands, and pressed me against the wall. I raised my lips and teased, "You are so brave, aren't you afraid of being discovered by your dad?" The rest of the words were blocked in my throat by him. Jo Suroi pushed my teeth open and drove straight in, not giving me a chance to resist. He kissed me hard and kissed for a long time before giving me a chance to breathe. "What will your mother do if she sees me kiss you?" Jo Suroi's eyes were extremely aggressive, and the smile on his lips was full of ruffian. "Coincidentally, I look down on your father, and it's just what I want to do to ruin their relationship." I put the lipstick on his lips and spread it, hooked his neck, and put my lips on his earlobe. I said, "You kissed me forcefully. I like your brother." His body stiffened. "Don't think about my brother. You don't understand him. He is just gentle on the surface." I blew into Jo Suroi's ears and murmured, "Brother, respect yourself. I will be your sister from now on." He didn't restrain himself after hearing this, but pinched my chin harder and kissed my lips. The kiss was too devoted until there was a knock on the door. "Xing Xing, are you in there? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Why did you take so long? Can Mom come in?" Jo Suroi let go of my lips, and I opened my mouth and said, "Mom, I was." Before I finished speaking, he blocked my mouth again, and he pinched my waist as a punishment. "Xing Xing, what did you say?" This time the knock on the door was more urgent. I saved my lips and smiled at Jo Suroi, who looked nervous and had warning eyes. Cheating and being afraid of being discovered by parents, how interesting. Last week I was drunk in the bar and met Jo Suroi. Seeing that he was very handsome, I hugged him and nibbled him. He insisted on being a drunk, and I told him to kiss him back in the future. Not long after, he found out that my mother was his father's current girlfriend. I thought he would give up, but he liked to play the cheating trick. I really want to see his father's expression when he sees us being intimate, and whether he can continue to put on a high and mighty attitude. I opened my lips and smiled softly. "Mom, my mother's boyfriend is rich, handsome, and has status, but I believe he is not sincere. The first time he met me, the future stepdaughter, he left me alone for an hour and let his two sons come out to receive me. Jo Sushi was kind and friendly, and looked more educated than the ruffian brother I met in the bar. Jo Suroi pretended not to know me and acted as if he was not welcoming to my mother and me. But he turned around and showed his true colors in the bathroom. I laughed unkindly at his back as he jumped out of the window and ran away. After applying lipstick, I walked out the door as if nothing had happened. My mother asked a few questions, but I fooled her. It turned out that Jo Suroi not only liked to eat secretly behind closed doors, but also dared to do something under the noses of my parents. Under the table, his fingers scratched my palm, and his face still had a stinky face as if I owed him millions. I pulled my hand away, talked and laughed with Jo Sushi on the other side, and added WeChat to him. Jo Suroi immediately squeezed my hand hard, as if he would crush my hand bones if I hooked up with his brother again. I stepped on his instep with my high heels and crushed it hard. He could bend down to pick up the spoon without changing his expression, and he held my ankle and took off my high heels. After the meal, my future stepfather called me and asked me if I was getting along well with his two sons and which one I thought was better. I was stunned. Did he see through the trick? But I was not panicked at all, and smiled at him heartlessly. "I like both of them. Thank you, uncle, for giving birth to a pair of good sons." His sudden change of expression made me feel very refreshed. My mother wanted to stay at their house and share a room with her boyfriend. I lived alone in the guest bedroom. I tend to suffer from insomnia in unfamiliar environments. When someone opened my door and entered the room in the middle of the night, I was unusually awake. He looked like a tall man. I didn't look closely and sneered, "Jo Suroi, you are so bold. You sneak into your sister's boudoir while your parents are asleep." The door was locked. The man walked to the bed and leaned over, trapping me in his arms. Then I saw that it was Jo Sushi. I was surprised. "Why is it you?" Jo Sushi showed a smile that was completely different from the daytime, with deep eyes. He rolled up my long hair with his fingers and put it to the tip of his nose to smell it. "Are you my brother's woman?" I denied it immediately, but Jo Sushi didn't care about my answer at all. He pinched my chin and kissed me. Oh my. Why do the two brothers like to force kisses? He was so strong that I struggled for a long time, but it was useless. There was a sudden knock on the door. Jo Sushi turned a deaf ear and continued to press my lips. The person outside the door seemed to lose patience and said in a low voice, "I heard some noise in the room. I know you are not asleep. Open the door for me." If Jo Sushi hadn't blocked my mouth, I would have laughed out loud. The two brothers didn't sleep well in the middle of the night, and they came to my bedroom as if they had agreed, and bumped into each other. How interesting. I really should take a picture of this scene for my mother's boyfriend to enjoy. Jo Sushi ignored his brother's shouting and concentrated on kissing me. I pinched his arm, and he opened his mouth and bit me hard. I tasted blood, and my lips were bitten by him. He put his ear close to my ear and lowered his voice very low. You are anxious when my brother comes. You like him so much? I hooked his neck and put my ear close to his ear, whispering, I like you too, stinky brother. He was stunned, obviously didn't expect me to say that. I touched his cheek, it was a little hot, could he be shy? When I opened the door for Joe Suroi, Joe Sichi had already hidden in the closet. As soon as he entered the room, he turned on the light angrily, and the dark bedroom was instantly bright as day. Noticing the bite on my lip, the anger in his eyes became even stronger. What are you doing if you don't sleep? I deliberately stroked the corners of my lips and smiled brightly, guess. Joe Suroi picked me up by the waist, threw me on the bed, and pressed me down. The hot kiss swept over me, and I was like a lamb to be slaughtered, letting him do whatever he wanted. I don't know how long it took, but he finally vented. I said fearlessly, just now your brother kissed me in this posture. My words confirmed his guess, and his anger, which had just subsided a little, was provoked by me again. Shi Xingchen, what do you want? I raised my hand and stroked his deep eyes like the sea of stars, and my tone was particularly gentle. So Roy, do you really like me, or do you just want to play with me? He paused, with a hint of hesitation on his face, as if he didn't know how to answer. If you like me, go tell your dad. If you don't dare, you will be my brother in the future, don't think about your sister. Joe Suroi frowned, what about you? Do you like me? If I say I like you, do you dare? He fell silent. So cowardly. I looked at the wardrobe, maybe your brother dares. Mentioning Joe City was like touching a tiger's butt. Joe Suroi exploded immediately. Shi Xingchen, don't take yourself too seriously. You are a little bit pretty, but there are many beauties around me, and you are not the only one. I raised my foot and kicked him down. Okay, get out. Joe Sushi was just as I expected. He dared to do what his brother didn't dare to do, to prove that he was better than his brother. I knew my brother's mentality well, and the words I said to Joe Suroi last night were actually for him. At breakfast, his father just took a sip of milk, and Joe Suchi said, Dad, I like Xingxing, and I want to be with her. I'm serious. His father was almost choked to death, coughing and pointing at Joe Suji angrily. Nonsense. You like her after just knowing her for one day. Don't you know that her mother and I are getting married? My mother was shocked and stunned. I immediately added fuel to the fire and held Joe City's hand. Uncle, City and I fell in love at first sight, can you help us? My future stepfather's face was ashen, and he looked at me with eyes that looked like he wanted to eat me. He pulled his son away. Wenchi, take your daughter home, I will pretend this didn't happen. She can't live here after marriage, understand? My mother panicked, looked at me, and then looked at her boyfriend. I stretched out my hand to Joe Sushi, will you come with me? Joe Suroi finally couldn't hold back, smashed the milk cup in his hand, and angrily said, Shi Xingchen, have you had enough trouble? I silently said to him, not enough. My mother is a love-brained person, and she is satisfied with love. None of the men she dated before were reliable, including my biological father who was also a scumbag. This time, the man who supported one of my senior sisters a year ago, my mother didn't mind it, thinking that the woman before was just playing around. And she was sincere to her. Since my mother refused to wake up, I could only let my future stepfather get out of here. I don't believe that a man who plays with women will regard women as more important than his heir. I threw myself into Joe Suji's arms and whispered to him, do you dare to run away from home with your sister? He grabbed my hand and looked at his brother provocatively. Dad, I am an adult and I am free to fall in love. At worst, I will move out after you get married. Joe Sushi came home with me in a big way. My mother was afraid of embarrassment and actually gave us the house and continued to live with her boyfriend. Joe Sushi walked around my house with disdain and changed his love-brained look in front of his father and said, I know what you are thinking, and I am not interested in being your mother's son. I was stunned for a moment and then smiled and said, you should have said it earlier, brother. I almost misunderstood that you and your brother both liked me. He lay on the sofa with his head raised. Stay away from my brother, I will accompany you to do what you want to do. Oh, it turns out that he is a brother complex. Really? I raised my hand and hooked his chin. I want a man, you can do it for me too. Joe Sushi's ears turned red, and he looked away awkwardly. Suddenly, there was a violent knock on the door. Shi Xingchen opened the door. Oh, the man who was still shouting that he didn't need me last night, can't hold it back in such a short time. I smiled at my brother playfully. Oh, someone came to my door voluntarily, but I have to force me to enjoy the blessing of two women. What should I do? Joe Sichi's face turned black, and he rushed to open the door before me. Brother, go. Xingxing is my girlfriend now, you can't steal my brother's woman. Joe Suroi said in a bad tone, come home with me. You don't like her at all. As long as she is mine, you will snatch her. You have been like this since you were a child. His words aroused my brother's rebellious psychology. Joe Sushi turned around and hugged me in his arms, kissed me in front of his brother, and his eyes were full of tenderness. Since I have chosen a partner to make trouble, I am naturally willing to cooperate in front of others. I leaned on my brother's arms, poked Joe Suroi's chest with my finger, and said jokingly, why don't you stay? 2. My bed is big enough for 3, 4 or 5 people. My brother's body stiffened, and Joe Suroi's face was so ugly. Xu Xingchen, I will make you regret provoking us brothers at the same time. Joe Suroi left with a stern remark. The next day, when I just arrived at the company, I heard that the original director of the design department suddenly resigned and a new director was to be parachuted in. This is my immediate boss. I can't help but look forward to a leader who is capable and tolerant of his subordinates. When I saw the true face of this boss, 10,000 alpacas roared through my heart. After he introduced himself, he specifically asked me to go with him to the director's office to report on my work. After closing the door, he also pulled the curtain to block all prying eyes. I thought it was not good. Sure enough, the next second he pushed me into the corner and trapped me in his arms. He was full of pride and laughed wantonly. Shu Xingchen, you can't escape from my grasp, so you should work hard under me in the future. Your father is not going to work in the company anymore. You come to me to show off, aren't you afraid of losing your position as heir? You are not an only child. Zhou Suroi pinched my chin. Don't worry, he can't take it away. Including you. He lowered his head and kissed me, not as arrogant as yesterday, but with a bit of his brother's gentleness. After the kiss, I laughed. Becoming my boss is your way of making me regret it. I soon paid the price for my disdainful ridicule. A new batch of samples arrived, and the fitting model had something to do temporarily, so I arranged to try them on another day. Zhou Suroi said, Shi Xingchen, you have a standard figure, you can take over. It is unreasonable to ask a designer to do the work of a fitting model, but it is not easy to refuse in public. Who among the social animals has not done work outside the scope of their job? How many dare to confront the leader? He kicked the design assistant who recorded the modification request out of the studio and asked me to be a fitting model and take care of the record. I changed into a new summer series sample, a tight smoky purple dress with pleated belly. Zhou Suroi stood behind me, pinched the excess fabric at my waist, and pressed his chest slightly against my back. It would be better if you tuck it in a little more. The back of the dress was a deep V design, which went all the way to the waist. The skin on my back, without the obstruction of the fabric, pressed against his chest. My heart was beating wildly, and I wanted to move away, but Zhou Suroi put his arm around my waist, put his chin on my shoulder, and said in a very sweet voice, "Oh, is your waist thinner than that of the fitting model?" I struggled to get out of his arms. Zhou Suroi, I can sue you for workplace sexual harassment. He spread his hands. It's harassment if you don't like it, and it's mutual affection if you like it. I glared at him. Who likes you? I was angry at him, and even more angry at myself. In the past, I was the only one who flirted with men, but I didn't expect Zhou Suroi to be so good at flirting when he really wanted to. I put a pair of men's swimming trunks in the sample clothes. And I threw it to him. The director has a good figure, why don't you try it on yourself? Zhou Suroi was thick-skinned and didn't object, and started to unbutton his shirt. He looked at me with a smile, but when he unbuttoned the third button, I couldn't stand it anymore and gave up, and ran out. Just kidding, if someone saw me alone with the new director and he took off his clothes, I would be so angry that I couldn't even keep my mouth shut. I sent a WeChat message to my brother to complain and asked him to pick me up from Get Off Work. Originally, I just wanted to annoy Zhou Suroi little, but my brother was a ruthless person. He ordered tea and snacks for everyone in the company, and made a big fuss with roses in his hands, announcing in the design department that he was my boyfriend and the director was his brother, asking everyone to take care of their girlfriends and brothers. After this operation, if Zhou Suroi wanted to have an office romance with me again, he would be a scumbag who was trying to steal his brother's wife. I looked at Zhou Suroi with a gloating look. He said with a fake smile, Shu Xingchen, stay and work overtime to revise the design draft. My bold assumption about Zhou Suroi was wrong. Even though my brother made our relationship public, he still enjoyed cheating and often called me to the office alone. My mother's boyfriend held a villa party and invited some business celebrities with good relationships. My mother was his female companion, but he did not invite me. When I appeared at the party with my brother's arm around his arm, his father's face was very ugly. The future stepfather took my mother's hand and stood in front of the crowd to announce something. I pinched my brother's arm, and he understood, and took me to block his father. Everyone, I want to take this opportunity to introduce my girlfriend to everyone. She is. We wanted to take the initiative before his father announced the news of his engagement with my mother. But before my brother could say my name, Zhou Suroi pulled him away and told him not to make trouble because he was drunk. Drunk? We just arrived and didn't even have time to drink a glass of water. What nonsense. Zhou Suchi said, as long as dad doesn't say it, I won't say it. The future stepfather was furious, but he couldn't get angry in public. In the end, the marriage was not announced. He was also afraid that his unfilial son would make everyone embarrassed. My mother felt wronged and sulked with me. Xing, how could you be like this? It's rare for mom to love a man so much, can't you fulfill mom's wish? When have you ever been in love without loving to death? I was very determined. My senior sister is only 1 year older than me, and he can sleep peacefully. Can you expect such a man to have integrity? If my mother wasn't a person who put love first, I really wouldn't care. She can be after this man's appearance or money, but she is after his sincerity. Can the ending be good? It's better to expect a rooster to lay eggs than to expect a scumbag to be loyal. My brother came over and hugged my arm, and acted coquettishly to my mother. Auntie, I really like Xing. If you don't mind your stepson and your daughter dating, then I don't mind. I only care about Xing. My mother looked at him awkwardly. This is not appropriate. People will gossip if they know. Zhou Sushi pouted. Auntie, you can't be so selfish. You and my father are in true love. Isn't Xing and I not? It doesn't make sense that you can get married, but you have to punish us, a pair of unfortunate couples. Unfortunate couples? I almost couldn't hold back my laughter. My mother was speechless and ran to dance with his father. Zhou Sushi also invited me to dance like a gentleman. He deliberately took me to dance next to his father. I laughed at his childishness in my heart, but I leaned on his shoulder in cooperation. Jo Suroi and his female companion were swaying and dancing not far away. His female companion was very beautiful, dressed in gorgeous clothes, with a proud expression. Maybe she was the daughter of a rich family. Fang Ruoxing, my father's preferred daughter-in-law. There is no possibility between my brother and you. My father has the final say on who he marries. I snorted coldly. He can choose women at will, but you have to be used as pawns by him for marriage. If you don't even have the freedom of marriage, what's the point of living? My younger brother laughed and changed the subject. Sister's waist is so thin. Brother likes thin waists the most. I raised my eyebrows. Brother, don't you like it? How could it be? I can't let it go too. As he said, he tightened his hand on my waist a little. The next second, my arm was grabbed by someone, and I was in another man's arms after a dizzy spin. When I stabilized my body, someone had already forcibly held my waist and started dancing. Fang Ruoxing was pushed into Jo Siqi's arms, and my younger brother glared at his brother with resentment, but he couldn't let Miss Fang get off the stage, so he could only dance with her. It was common to exchange partners on the dance floor. The guests around didn't react much, but my future stepfather had a dark face. Are you afraid of the consequences of abandoning your marriage partner and hooking up with another woman? I deliberately made a wrong step and stepped on Jo Suroi's instep. Are you jealous? Jo Suroi laughed. As long as you admit that you are jealous, I will ignore her tonight. Just tonight? Jo Suroi, you really have mastered the art of language. I stepped on him again and turned away. My younger brother pushed Fang Ruoxing to him and caught up with me. Are you not satisfied with my sister having me? I stopped and touched my younger brother's face. Be careful not to make the fake play real. Falling in love with me will lead to nothing. Humph, none of the men in the Jo family are good. The next day at the department meeting, Jo Suroi was furious. He threw a designer's design in front of him and scolded him. Jiang Chao, do you really think I can't tell which international brand's imitation you designed? Just take someone else's design and modify it to make it your own. I don't know what the previous director asked you to do. I will never allow such a thing to happen when you design under me. The scolded designer relied on his seniority to defend himself. Imitations of big brands sell well, and good sales are the hard truth for the company's profitability. It's because there are too many people like you. You take advantage of others and take shortcuts to make profits. Make the soil for originality worse. It was the first time I saw Jo Suroi so serious, and I couldn't help but look at him a little absent-mindedly. If your original design doesn't sell well, you should look for the reasons in yourself and try to design styles that are popular with the public. International brands also climbed to the top step by step from obscurity. I always believe that Chinese original designs will be recognized internationally and become global fashion luxury goods. Jo Suroi's sonorous and powerful words shocked the conference room into silence, and even the designer who had just argued was silent. It is the nature of businessmen to pursue profit. I thought that he grew up in that kind of family and would be more willing to take shortcuts to make money. I didn't expect that he still had a piece of pure land in his heart, with his own bottom line and principles. At this moment, he seemed to be glowing all over, which made my heart excited. The previous director was profit-driven and only sought sales. He also encouraged his designers to imitate big brands, and the sales department was happy to see it happen. I often lament that originality is dying. What a sad thing it is. But a social animal like me will not fight against stones with eggs and give advice at the cost of losing my job. After the meeting, Jo Suroi called me to his office alone. He was silent for a long time before he spoke. You don't agree with Jiang Chao's idea, do you? I said, Jo Suroi, I hope your behavior can be as beautiful as your words. Don't go home to inherit your father's kingdom before you stick to it for a long time, and leave the mess to us. He frowned. Don't worry, I can take care of both. I chuckled. Okay, I believe you. Jo Suroi also smiled. That was the most handsome time you have ever been since I met you. As long as you hold on to the original position for one day, I am willing to take the lead for you. I got excited and couldn't help but say something very impulsive. Jo Suroi was stunned when he heard it, and then he hugged me in his arms without saying anything. Xing, you are standing firmly on my side, which really makes my heart beat. I kicked him. I support you to carry out your work, but it does not mean I support you to take advantage of me. I suspect that Jo Suroi has bought our clothing company, otherwise how could he be so wanton and often skip work after 2 or 3 hours? The design plan of the National Style series I made was approved by him. He asked me to design this new series alone and sent an extra design assistant to help me. For a time, the rumors in the department spread even more, saying that I was reused by connections, and I was in love with the director's brother, and I was unclear with the director. When beautiful women succeed in the workplace, they will always be maliciously speculated by some people, thinking that they rely on special means to get to the top. But I don't care about rumors. Since I joined the company, this period of time has been the most comfortable for me to work. Finally, I don't have to do some designs against my will, find my original intention, and show my talents according to my own preferences. Jo Suroi gave a lot of useful suggestions for the design of the National Style series. Let's not talk about feelings, at least we are in sync at work. In order to make the new series, I often stay overtime on my own initiative. After Jo Suroi found out, he stayed in the office more and more every day, and even accompanied me to work overtime. He finally pissed off his father in this way. The future stepfather did not find bad luck with his son, but found me, a fox spirit. Tell me, how can you stay away from my two sons? Uncle, what era is it? You still play arranged marriage? Aren't you afraid that they will not be happy after marriage? His face was full of disdain for me. A woman like you is not worthy of them. As long as I live, you will never enter the Joe family. Did I dig your ancestors' graves? You dislike me so much. I was too lazy to waste my words, so I just made a request directly. If you stay away from my mother, I will stay away from your son. I thought he would struggle for a while, but I didn't expect him to agree directly. I was so angry that I laughed. Although this was the ending I had hoped for, I felt sorry for my mother for giving up on her so easily. I picked up the water cup and splashed all the water on his face, then called him a scumbag and walked away. He was honest and broke up with my mother that day. My mother cried and went home, scolding me for being heartless and insisting on breaking them up. I didn't accept exaggeration, so I played the recording to my mother. Did you hear it clearly? He didn't hesitate when he chose to give up on you. The facts prove that he doesn't love you at all. He just wants to keep me away from his son and he doesn't want to give up on you. My mother was hit hard and locked herself in the bedroom, refusing to even eat. I packed Joe Sushi's luggage and kicked him out. Brother, go home. We succeeded. The cooperation ends here. Joe Sushi looked sad and held me tightly. Sister is so cruel. She kicked me away after using me. But I can't bear to leave my sister. What should I do? Stop acting. Your father and brother are not here. There is no audience to watch you act. Joe Sushi lowered his head and bit my lips. He said fiercely, how can you be sure that I have not been moved during the time I lived with you? I spread my hands. I told you long ago, don't love me. There is no result. The next day, Joe Suroi did not come to work in the company. I felt a little regretful. Is he going to resign? I resisted contacting him. 2 days later, the new director arrived. The new series that Joe Suroi had worked hard on was strangled in the cradle by the new director before it was put into production and launched. I was also instigated by my colleagues in front of the new director, and gradually marginalized and not reused. Looking at the samples of the Chinese-style series piled up in the warehouse, I suddenly had the idea of resigning. The Chinese-style series is my hard work. Now it is like my own child died in the womb. I am heartbroken. Joe Suroi, you left the position, how can I persist alone? I wrote a resignation letter and submitted it, and it was approved in seconds. Not to mention retaining, I didn't even need to do the handover work. I only made one request, to take away the samples and design drafts of the Chinese-style series. My colleagues' gossip floated into my ears, saying that the new director was a female director. I couldn't rely on beauty to get promoted, so I packed up and left. The only 2 assistants who came to see me off were the 2 assistants who worked on the Chinese-style series with me. I patted their shoulders and asked them to flatter the new director, and they could say some complaints about me and Joe Suroi to her, and try not to be marginalized. They cried, but I couldn't cry. I just felt a ball of cotton stuck in my throat and choked. I wandered aimlessly on the street, holding the cardboard box. Suddenly, my hand was empty. I looked up and saw a familiar handsome face. After not seeing him for a week, he seemed to have lost some weight, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was exhausted from not sleeping all night. He held my cardboard box in one hand, rubbed my head with the other hand, and joked, Xing really can't do without me. You were kicked out as soon as I left. Don't you know how to ask for help when you are bullied? Do you think I am Joe Suroi? The cotton stuffed in my throat seemed to expand. I said hoarsely, I promised your dad that I would stay away from you brothers. What are children best at? Joe Suroi asked inexplicably, and I looked at him in confusion. He smiled, children are best at playing tricks. If you play tricks, your parents can't do anything to you. You are the child. He took my hand and stuffed me into his sports car parked on the side of the road. Your mom has understood that my dad doesn't care about her that much. They probably won't get back together. Don't worry. When Joe Suroi brought me back to the company, I was still in a state of shock. He said he bought the company and now he has the final say in the company. The new director and those who instigated the new director to marginalize me were fired by him. Joe Suroi patted my head and said, go hang up the samples of the Chinese-style series, and we will continue to do it. Hearing this, the cotton in my throat disappeared, replaced by red eyes. I didn't want to cry all the time, but Joe Suroi's words broke my defense. Seeing that I was in a bad mood, he quickly pushed me into the director's office. Why are you crying? He hurriedly pulled out tissues to help me wipe my tears, but the more he wiped, the more tears I cried. He simply threw away the tissue and hugged me in his arms. Silly, you should now take advantage of the power of others and happily send the people who bullied you away, instead of hiding here and crying. I muttered, you are the dog, only you know idioms. Joe Suroi promoted me to design director. I thought he was going to be a boss who sat back, but I didn't expect him to stay in the company all day and even work overtime with me. I felt something was wrong and wanted to ask several times but couldn't. I was afraid to know how much he had paid behind his back to come back. Women are easily soft-hearted, and soft-heartedness is more likely to be emotional. The person he is going to marry in the future is Fang Washing, and I shouldn't let myself fall into it. I just lay down on the bed and prepared to fall asleep. Joe Suchi sent me a message saying that he was downstairs and asked me to go down to meet him. As soon as my brother saw me, he hugged me and refused to let go. Sister, I miss you so much, do you miss me? I pushed him away with disgust. Let's talk about business. He glared at me angrily, and seeing that I was unmoved, he had to give up. Guess where I just came from? I raised my eyebrows to see him not speaking, but he couldn't help revealing the answer himself. My brother moved out, and I just came from his place. My younger brother smiled slyly. My brother used all his savings over the years to buy your crappy clothing company. He and Dad have a falling out and refuse to give in. I'm afraid he won't even be able to keep his position as heir. My heart skipped a beat when I heard this, and I tried to ask, is the real purpose of your cooperation with me to squeeze out your brother? Joe Sushi snapped his fingers, kill two birds with one stone, drive your mother away, and also steal my brother away. My dad always said that I was childish and incapable of taking on big responsibilities. Now that my brother is gone, he can only settle for the next best thing. Stinky younger brother really has a deep mind. Seeing that I looked unhappy, he quickly put his arm around my shoulders. Don't be angry, sister. We are both win-win. My brother gave up being the heir, and he will definitely decide his own marriage. You have a chance. I slapped his hand away, not happy about it. My original intention was just to take my mother away from the scumbag, and I never wanted Joe Siroi to lose his rightful position. Seeing that I ignored him, Joe Sushi panicked and shook my arm to pretend to be pitiful. I'll tell you a secret of my brother, and you will definitely not be angry after hearing it. My mother has been a little bit wrong recently. She goes out early and comes back late. When I ask her what she does, she hesitates and obviously prevaricates with me. I enjoyed it for half a month, and I don't plan to enjoy it anymore. Mom, are you and Joe Lingyun rekindled? My mother is not good at lying. Every time she lies, her eyes are erratic, and I can see through it at a glance. She was forced to admit by my stern eyes. Xingxing, Lingyan said that he promised you before just for show, just to separate you from his son. He really loves me. Bah, you believe the old scumbag's lies? I knew it well. Joe Lingyan thought that Joe Siroi and him had a falling out, and I broke the agreement first, so he hooked up with my mother again to annoy me. I was furious, and I couldn't help but say to my mother, Mom, Joe Lingyan and your daughter, you have to choose one, him or me. I ran away from home, without even packing a piece of clothes, with only a mobile phone in my pocket. For some reason, I found Joe Siroi, and he took me in for the night. Seeing that his bathroom was bigger than my bedroom, I felt less guilty about him. It's true that a phoenix without feathers is not as good as a chicken. A phoenix without feathers is still a phoenix. Joe Siroi also frowned when he learned that my mom and his dad were hooking up again. He pulled out an old photo from his wallet, a family photo of 4 people. In the photo, Joe Siroi had not completely lost his youthfulness, and Joe Suchi looked like a high school student at most. Sitting between the brothers was a beautiful woman with an elegant temperament and beautiful appearance. I held the photo in my hand and was stunned for a long time. Because this middle-aged beautiful woman looked very similar to my mom, at least 70% similar, but my mom's temperament was not as grand as hers. After digesting the shock, I quickly sorted out my thoughts. I thought it was a family ethics drama, but it turns out that your dad is playing a substitute literature, and your mom is the white moonlight in your dad's heart. Speaking of which, my senior sister looks 30% like your mom. Joe Siroi nodded. After my mom passed away, your mom might be the woman who looks most like my mom among the women my dad met. I completely understood that it was normal for the Joe brothers to not welcome my mom. Who wants their dad to marry a body double and call the body double mom? Isn't this the biggest blasphemy to their deceased mother? I touched my face. Fortunately, I look like my scumbag dad, otherwise, the old scumbag would have set his sights on me. I took out my phone and asked Joe Siroi if he minded if I took a photo for my mom. My mom would never be a body double for anyone, no matter how love-brained she is. Joe Siroi readily agreed. As soon as I took the photo, he picked me up by the waist. He took me to the bedroom and put me on the bed and didn't leave. I was a little panicked. He really had bad intentions and leaned over to kiss me. I raised my hand to cover his mouth. Although I broke up with your brother, you are not my boyfriend. He took my hand away. I gave up my father's kingdom for you. Refused to marry Fang Ruoxing, and came back to accompany you to fulfill your dream. Isn't this enough to move you to pledge your love to me? I kicked him in the chest. I don't believe you. Isn't this your dream? Humph, I remember the secret Joe Sushi told me that night. He said, I just can't bear to see him give up his dream and follow the path his father arranged for him. Joe Siroi liked painting since he was a child, and became fascinated with fashion design when he was a little older. But under pressure from his father, he gave up his hobby, learned how to manage and operate a company, frequently socialized, and sacrificed his freedom of marriage. Your brother may not want to take your position as heir, he just wants to help you gain freedom and regain your dream. Joe Siroi lay down beside me and sighed. I know. But it's not all. The brat has liked to steal my things since he was a child, but he doesn't have a long-term habit. He gets tired of playing with them for a while, and then throws them to me to clean up the mess. He is very rebellious and hates being restricted. My father is authoritarian, so he can't be comfortable in the company. I looked at him complaining, but his eyes were gentle, and I laughed in my heart. They are obviously brothers who care about each other, but they refuse to admit it on the surface. And they like to sabotage each other. You gave up your dream partly for your brother. One of you will lose your freedom. Joe Siroi was silent for a long time before saying, it would be best if he can do it. I am happy to be free. He turned over and hugged me, kissing my neck. Xingxing, be my girlfriend. I will not be controlled by my father anymore, you believe me? I showed my mother Joe Siroi's family photo and explained the situation clearly. My mother burst into tears and said she never wanted to see Zhou Lingyang again, and she blocked him. As expected, the deeper the love, the more cruel the hatred. My mother pursues the ultimate love and wants the other party to love her wholeheartedly. How could she tolerate being used as a substitute? The National Style series completed by Zhou Surui and my team was finally successfully launched, and the early catwalk and advertising promotion were very effective. The sales performance of the pre-sale link of the official flagship store online is gratifying, and I believe that the sales of physical stores will not disappoint. When I held a regular department meeting, Zhou Surui also came to attend the meeting. The designer who was criticized by him at that time was still on the list, and he looked at him amiably. Jiang Chao, do you still think it is better to sell imitations of big brands? Jiang Chao blushed. Designers who make imitations of big brands can be lazy, and the sales are good. But the sense of accomplishment that designers get from making real originals is something that they can never experience from making imitations. Thank you, Mr. Zhou, for helping me find my original intention. The sales of the National Style series have been leading all the way, far exceeding other series of the company, and even praised by many big versus and became a hot search. After the celebration banquet, Zhou Surui drove me to the tallest building in the city. It seemed that the whole city could be seen from the observation deck. We stood side by side, the evening breeze blew on our faces, and he looked into the distance. Jiang Chao thanked me for helping him find his original intention. Xing, he should actually thank you. I looked at him in confusion. Because you helped me find my original intention and dream. Zhou Surui raised his hand and gently stroked my face. My words scolding him were just a momentary impulse, and you are the one who really ignited me. It is your passion and hard work for original design that infected me and reminded me of my past dreams. The time I spent with you creating the National Style series was both fulfilling and happy. His kiss fell on my forehead. You are my morning star. The kiss fell on the tip of my nose again. When it was about to touch my lips, Zhou Surui paused, and his voice was cautious. Can I? I raised my arm and hooked his neck. So much nonsense. Master Zhou, go over and kiss me, regardless of whether I am happy or not. I took the initiative to kiss his lips, and no longer wanted to suppress my heartbeat for him. Zhou Surui didn't know that it was he who gave me the creative space to expand my territory in the world of originality. The time I spent with him creating the National Style series was also full of happiness and satisfaction for me. Xing, can you go home with me? Tomorrow? I was a little resistant in my heart, but I still agreed to him. Zhou Lingyang looked at me as if I saw a cockroach. His eyes were full of disgust. Zhou Sushi sat aside and watched the show leisurely. Zhou Surui took my hand and walked to his father. Dad, Xing and I are together. I hope to get your approval. Nonsense. She was dating your brother a while ago. Zhou Lingyang was so angry. She just plays you in the palm of her hand, alienating brothers and fathers and sons. I absolutely don't agree with you being with her. Brother and Xing are fake. They just want to break up you and Aunt Wenxi. Xing has always liked me. Zhou Sushi rolled his eyes and sneered, quite narcissistic. Zhou Lingyang refused to agree, saying that unless he died, he would never allow me to be his daughter-in-law. Zhou Surui let go of my hand and knelt down in front of his father. Dad, I have never loved a woman so much. You haven't let go of my mother for so many years, and the people you find are all substitutes for my mother. Do you want me to be like you? Shut up. Zhou Lingyang slammed the table and stood up. This woman is not worthy of being compared with your mother. In the end, we parted unhappily, and Zhou Lingyang did not agree. But Zhou Surui's attitude was quite firm. Even if his father did not agree, he would still marry me. After marriage, we will run a clothing company together and live a rich and happy life. My mother did not oppose Zhou Surui and me. Recently, my mother met her first love, and they are both single now. I asked someone to investigate the details of that first love, and found that his character, appearance, family and financial situation were all good, and he had no bad habits, so I helped to match them up. My mother soon fell in love with a new relationship. Seeing that I was happy to see it happen, she was even more happy. The harm Zhou Lingyang brought to her was gradually dissipating. In 1 year, Zhou Surui and I launched many new fashion series with Chinese and ethnic elements, which received good market feedback and ranked first in the domestic fashion brand sales. At the company's annual meeting, Zhou Surui took the opportunity to propose to me while giving a speech on stage. I readily agreed. He was very happy and never refused anyone's toast. He went home and hugged me all night, and he was very energetic. I was sore all over and tired that I couldn't open my eyelids, but I still had to listen to him whispering in my ear, Xing, I love you, give me a little Xing. The date for getting the marriage certificate was selected, and it was my younger brother who sent me the household registration book. I gave Zhou Sushi a thumbs up. You are worthy of it, the strongest assist. My younger brother has matured a lot, and even Zhou Surui didn't expect him to stick to his father's company for so long. Zhou Sushi looked at me with resentment in his eyes. My beloved sister is getting married, but the person she is marrying is not me. This kid made trouble with me again while his brother was not at home. I laughed and scolded him a few times. But my brother held my hand and said seriously, sister promised me that if she divorced my brother, she would be with me. Stinky. Brother, what nonsense are you talking about? Your brother and I haven't even gotten married yet, and you curse us to get divorced. He let go of his hand in frustration. During the time when I lived with my sister, she took care of my daily life and never disliked my temper. I really fell in love with my sister. Whether my sister believes it or not, I won't regret it if I say it out loud. I was stunned. You have an Oedipus complex. Do you like women who take care of your food, drink, defecation, and urination? I'm not interested in being someone's wife and mother. My brother got angry so easily that he threw the household registration book on the table and got up and left. Xingchen, are you allergic to romance? The only confession I made in my life was ruined by you. I hate you. Stinky brother, not leaving you any hope is the greatest love for you. My mother and her first love had their wedding earlier than me. While Zhou Surui and I were taking wedding photos, my mother had already prepared the banquet. Zhou Lingyan did not show up on the wedding day. My mother cursed and said that Zhou Lingyan was indeed a scumbag who could not bear not to show up at his own son's wedding. The next time I saw Zhou Lingyan was the day I gave birth to my first child. Sure enough, no one can be cruel to human cubs. Zhou Lingyang hugged my and Zhou Suroi's son and smiled from the bottom of his heart for the first time. My dear, call me grandpa. Zhou Sishi rolled his eyes. Dad, a monkey who has just been born, how can he speak human language? You are the monkey. Zhou Lingyang glared at his brother fiercely and teased the deer like a baby. HMPH, you forgot your son? When you have a grandson. Zhou Lingyang ignored him. Grandpa gave you a name, Zhou Xinjie, dear boy, do you like it? My mother finally couldn't help but scold him. You don't even recognize your daughter-in-law, and you come here to be a cheap grandfather, and you're vying to name him. Who gives you the face? Zhou Lingyan couldn't hold his face, and looked at me reluctantly. After you finish your confinement, take Xinjie back to the Zhou family. Zhou Suroi, who had been taking care of me by the bed, spoke up. Dad, we will bring the child home to see you often, but we already have a small family and will not live with you in the future. As for the child's name, Xingxing and I interrupted him. Husband, let's call him Xinjie, I think it sounds good. Although Zhou Suroi and I had already thought of a name for the child, we had to give Zhou Lingying a way out to ease the relationship. No matter how bad Zhou Lingying is, he is Zhou Suroi's biological father. Although Zhou Suroi didn't say it, I knew that he really wanted to break the ice with his father. I love him and hope he can be happy. This little concession is nothing to me. Zhou Lingyang returned the child to Zhou Suroi and stuffed a big red envelope into my hand. You come home often. After the confinement period, Zhou Suroi and I chose a sunny weekend and took Xinjie back to the Zhou family. We invited a famous photographer in the industry to take a family photo. Before taking the photo, Zhou Lingyan took out a jade bracelet and gave it to me. Put it on. This is Suroi's mother's favorite bracelet when she was alive. I happily took it. Thank you, Dad. Zhou Suroi's eyes were red when he looked at the bracelet on my wrist. He held my hand and said, Xingxing, Mom will be very happy to see this scene. Thank you. I know he is thanking me for being willing to tolerate everything his father did in the past, willing to reconcile, and willing to bring the child back to the Zhou family with him to make his family harmonious. I stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. Husband, thank me, and behave well when you get home tonight. Zhou Suroi stared at my lips meaningfully. Don't worry, I guarantee that my wife will be satisfied. End of the article.